As children, we loved stories. In fact, we still do. So why not use this power of storytelling to make the best of our designs? Hi, my name is Rakshita Gupta. I'm a design manager and a community host at Design Sundays. In today's video, I'm going to share a short version of a session conducted with Menaka Chandrashekhar where she shares about the ingredients of a good story. So let's get started.
My name is Menaka and I'm a product design lead at Property Guru. And in terms of today's agenda, we'll be covering these things. So we'll start with why storytelling matters, how to build a narrative, how do we add emotion to the story. Let's begin. So the first one, which is why storytelling matters. So I found this amazing quote by John Maida. He says this about the role of design in organizations, which is basically that the complexity of design interests us as designers, but the rest of your org, they don't care. And this is a constant struggle we face regardless of where design sits in the process. We ask for a seat at the table and we have it, whether it's inside the org as part of your product design team or outside as a creative agency or consultant that's been hired to work on a product. So what we need to remember is in order to affect people at an emotional level and change their behavior and mind, it's most important to connect with them through a story. So why we need stories is for three key reasons. The first one is to change perspectives. As I was just talking about it, us human beings, we are naturally very risk averse. We hate change. We don't like things to change at all. But as designers, our job is to create and share fictions and basically represent the better world that can be through our concepts that we are creating. And we are responsible to assess what is the as-is state and then communicate the to-be state of that product. Next reason would be to build empathy. Humans, for us, emotions and hormones are connected very closely and we feel faster than we can actually think. There is dopamine and oxytocin hormones that get released in your brain when you're emotionally charged up, and that often happens when you're listening to a very engaging story. In fact, many parts of your brain that light up when you're doing certain actions are the same parts of your brain such as your motor and sensory cortices and language comprehension centers in your brain that light up when you're listening to a very good story as well. Hopefully, I can light up some parts of your brain today. The last reason would be to inspire an action. So I'm sure you guys have heard or listened to many TED Talks or maybe heard a speaker before in pre-COVID days in person, right? Or read a book that is really inspiring even. So all of those would have inspired you to take an action because of the way the story was told. And a simple example is the speech by Greta Thunberg at the UN Climate Summit. I'm sure you've heard the "How dare you" speech, right? So despite what you think about Greta, her speech has impacted many people to take action around the world. So these are in summary the three key reasons that we need stories. Next, when do we actually tell this story in the product development process? So typically what happens in the usual agile development cycle is we start by mapping everything to a story, but along the way we get very engrossed in the what and the why. That's where we spend the most amount of time. But what happens is we should keep track of the why, because that's ideally the shared narrative that will help your team achieve that envisioned outcome that you start off with, right? And in a way, it builds empathy for each other, and we will also inspire other people in the team to take ownership along the way if everyone can unite for the same cause. And that cause, the why, is basically how you tell the story. Next, I will walk you through what it takes to build narratives. Now, as designers, we have the potential to transform information into someone's mind. That is really one of our superpowers, and in order to do that via storytelling, we need a very good narrative. Now, to write mystery novels, authors usually plot backwards. How would the killer hide the weapon? How did they kill? Why did they kill? How does a detective's path meet the killer's path? And so on and so forth, right? Now, as designers, we plot things as well. So we plot, for example, the sitemap while building a website, and then we layer in connectivity between pages, etc. And for an absorbing story in a well-designed product, everything has to take place over time. And that requires very detailed attention to the plot of the narrative, which is essentially the actions that the user takes while engaging with your product. Now, a good narrative helps to create memories and forge connections with the product. And that's something you should remember as we continue on. So what does it take to make a good story? There are 5 ingredients, and I'm going to walk you through them. I think the first one, the arc, that is something Charu had explained in her talk as well, but I'm just recalling it again. So the first one, it's about having an arc in your story. There's always a beginning, middle, and an end to any story. Next, there is change, and this is basically a transformation that happens to the main character or the situation in your story. Then we have theme, which is the greater purpose that makes the entire story meaningful. Next is coherence. Coherence refers to the details that are revealed along the way, and these details, they build on top of each other as the story continues. Lastly, we have plausibility. Essentially, it's the believable part of your story and making sure that the story follows its own rules that it sets for itself. Now I'm going to explain this. This is very abstract. I know it's a bit hard to understand, which is why I'm going to explain it. Can you guess how? Obviously, through a story. What else? So I will tell you 3 versions of this story. A chicken tries to cross the road and a truck approaches slowly. Okay, bear with me. There are 3 endings to the story. So what happens next? Now, in the first story, a magic balloon lifts the chicken to safety. So as the truck approaches, the chicken escapes with a flying balloon. In the second story, the chicken unfortunately meets its end. It dies. But there's also a red fish on the side of the road for some reason. And then in the last story, this chicken, she's a tough chicken. She whips out a stop sign and she stops the truck, and it screeches to a halt, and then the baby chicks, they cross the road and they are safe and everyone is happy. Now, which one do you guys think was the most satisfying story? Can you guys maybe post in the comments? Let's see if you guys can guess which story is probably the most satisfying.
Are you guys enjoying the video so far? I'm sure you are. If you want to watch similar content, we have a huge list of videos on our channel. Make sure to check them out and hit the subscribe and the bell icon. For now, let's get back to the video.
So in the magic chicken story, let's look at the story ingredients. Yeah. So there was an arc, there was a change, there was coherence, there's theme, and plausibility is completely missing. So of course, the 3 out of 5 points. Going back to the magic chicken story, the plausibility of the story is kind of really questionable, because how do you really know of any chicken that flies away? And I mean, they can fly, yes, but with a magic balloon, probably not. And of course, there is no higher theme in this kind of a story, because it's very abrupt. The action that you expect to happen happens very abruptly. Now, in the next story, which is the dead chicken, you have an arc, you have change, plausibility. Again, no theme, but even coherence takes a hit, because there is something called, so the red fish that I was referring to is actually a red herring. It's an irrelevant subplot or a detail that confuses the reader in a story. Or think of it like in a Bollywood movie that you're watching, and there's a random item number that you're wondering, like, why is it even here? Why am I watching this? So that's basically a red herring. It's there to confuse you and supposedly entertain, but mostly confuse you. And similarly, there are sometimes interfaces where there are buttons on the UI with irrelevant action, but they can become a red herring. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in the last story, which is the tough chicken, yes, this scores the highest of 4 out of 5. So it definitely has an arc. There is a change that happens in the story, because there is a higher theme, because it's all about saving the little chicks or helping them cross the road. And then, of course, the plausibility is the only one that's probably missing out of all of this. So think of these ingredients when you're building a presentation deck. And speaking of presentations, let me share this example with you of a design challenge presentation that I gave while applying for my current job at Property Guru. So the design challenge I was given was to create an app for finding a flatmate in New York. Now, I'm based out of Singapore, so I had to kind of make the story come across about who am I designing for. So in terms of presentation itself, the main theme that I weaved around into all of this was about American sitcoms and the characters of those sitcoms who had roommates. Because for me, that was the overarching theme that helped me build my narrative. And because it's about roommates, I try to make the theme relatable. So I had to put in some humor and create some coherence, because I wanted to put relevant memes to punctuate the point I was making. Like, for example, expectation versus reality. I kind of use memes and pictures to explain what I'm trying to say, and also inject my personality into it. So that way I've used humor to create coherence. And the plausibility part of it was addressed in my design, because I had a demo part of the design And then the last section, which was around growth opportunities, that's what addresses the plausibility. And then there are separators which are clearly demarcated. These help signal a change that happens. If I go back to the 5 ingredients, those are something to keep in mind, and you'll find some of those ingredients in example over here. Next, I'm going to talk about certain frameworks. So in the first one, the framework about the narrative arc, it's basically about a structure of complex narratives comprising of smaller stories. So for example, there is usually exposition or a starting point. Next comes an inciting incident, and usually all this narrative is about a certain persona or a certain character whose story we are following. Yeah, so it could be about your product story itself if it's a brand campaign. It could be the persona's journey, and that's how you're explaining in a presentation. You can use this narrative arc for multiple purposes. So again, we start with an exposition or a starting point. Then there is an inciting incident. There are certain rising actions that happen, eventually leading to a crisis, and then a climax followed by denouement or falling action, and finally there is a conclusion. Now let's look at an example with the narrative arc in an onboarding experience for Duolingo. So Duolingo is an app that lets you learn a language. I'm sure maybe some of you have tried this out before. So in their onboarding experience, if we look at it in the context of a narrative arc, we start with obviously the first screen, which is the get started screen. Then there is a rising action. In this case, there are 2 rising actions that happen, which is asking you to pick a goal, and then they also ask you, why are you learning this in? Then comes the next one, which is a crisis, which you have to choose a path of where you want to go next, followed by the climax, which is where you need to translate a sentence almost in order to get placed into where you need to go next. And then there is a falling action of you having completed the test, so they tell you your results, and eventually it closes off with creating a profile. So this is a good example of how you can structure your entire onboarding experience using the framework of a narrative arc. Next, I'll be talking about some tools that you can use for storytelling. These are by no means very new. I'm just trying to frame them in the context of product design. So I hope you look at it with that mindset. Yeah. So, okay, the first one, it's about storyboarding. So of course, the purpose of a storyboard is to explain action with a concise set of pictures. The example I have here is actually not a product example, but it's from a marketing campaign for this mattress called Casper. And they use this, I'm just showing you what a storyboard looks like. So they've used frame by frame to convey the story of the mattress, rather the campaign tagline, which is like the perfect mattress for facing your demons. I thought it was very funny. So they actually ran this as a Subway ad in the US, and that's kind of how I found this. Also, Charu had mentioned in the first talk about how Airbnb hired Pixar animators to actually map out the traveler's experience in order to come up with a product. So that's another example. So looking at another example, this is from UX Studio blog. They are showing you an example of how you can tell the story of a user. In this case, it could be a user story or a problem that they're having, or it could be a persona if you're using personas while designing. What you can use it for is basically explain the user's problem in the situational context. So when you're presenting to your stakeholders, you almost tell the story of your users. Instead of doing it verbally, you do it in the form of a storyboard, and that makes it a bit easier to follow along before you switch into your designs. So that could be one sort of application of this tool. A quick hack that I've used for creating characters, so what I do is I rely on plugins in Figma. So there is this plugin called Blush, and I use that to create the characters for my story and sort of weave that into my storytelling when I'm presenting my designs as well. So that's one example. So the next tool is about rules of threes. So essentially what the rule is about is that items appear in groups of threes, and the last element usually breaks the pattern set in motion by the first two. Now, it's not a necessity that third action should be something that breaks the pattern, but it's advised to do it that way because that will create the impact that you want. So for example, I've used this rule of threes in one of the tools that we've designed for home loan application to check how much loan you can borrow. This tool helps you do that. So in the how does it work section, if you notice, there is a 1, 2, 3. I've broken it down in 3 easy steps. And the first two require the user to do an action, which is answer questions, upload a document. And then the third one, which breaks the pattern, essentially has a CTA to get them started or start using the tool. So that's how I kind of interpreted this rule in the product that I was designing. Another example I have is from Feedly. Now, this is an example where there is no pattern breaking happening in the third step, but still you can use rule of threes essentially to chunk out the information so that it's memorable for your users. This is one landing page, by the way. They've used rule of threes 2 times in one landing page. If you go and search for Feedly, you'll see that they explain the key benefits in like 3 steps for who uses it, for the users to understand, and then they also explain their steps in 3 steps. Of course, they have a get started here. If they really wanted to improve this get started, they could have moved the button as the third action and then break the pattern as well. And then the next tool is Hitchcock's rule. Now, this is a rule from filmmaking, essentially, that the size of any object in your frame should be proportional to the importance of the story at that moment. Now, for example, you can use a tight shot, like let's say you are shooting a film of a cooking show and the story is about the ingredients being used. Then you can use the tight shot to sort of focus the frame into the ingredients. The medium shot is used for showing relation between 2 objects or subjects rather. So in this case, the story could be about how the husband is preparing dinner for his wife on their anniversary. It's a bit unclear, but there is a date that is circled on the calendar here. So essentially it's showing relationship between those two. And then the wide shot in this particular scenario is shown for you to understand what's the context. So this guy, he's in the kitchen and you can see just enough details of his surrounding to get the context of where he is. I found an example for you guys. This is from the onboarding experience for parents in the YouTube Kids app. This animation is a bit too fast, so what I will do is I will just show you. So what they do is they use a wide shot to basically introduce the app in the iPad. Then next they use a medium or almost a close frame, I would say. Like they go from wide to medium and that happens in the animation itself, and then closer together to actually explain the settings and where to find the settings. And I thought this was very smart because this is a example which shows you the rule of threes and the Hitchcock's rule at the same time. The other one, it's in the same animation, but what happens next is they show you the relation between 2 screens. So they don't actually go close like into the details. They're showing you a wide shot to swipe between 2 screens and show you the action. So if you swipe left, you see this, or if you swipe right, then you go back to the screen. That's essentially what the animation shows. So then comes the next portion, which is about adding emotion. So great stories don't just have a good plot, they all need to make us feel something. So if you look at this photo, just look at it for a second, you can understand what's happening to the audience, right? You would have guessed by now they're sitting in a movie theater, and what the audience is actually feeling is the same emotions as the people in the movie. And what's amazing is Homo sapiens is the only species that's capable of creating and believing fictional concepts that don't have a physical or biological reality. Meaning to say, it can be a concept and we can believe it so much that we'll want it to become real. I mean, money, religion, and human rights are examples actually of concepts that certain groups of people decide to believe and they make it real for themselves, because until you believe it, it's not real. Similarly, emotions are signals that an experience is really important to us. Feelings make them real. And when we remember an experience, we don't want to remember just the visual or the smell. We remember how we feel at that time. So it's very important to remember how can we make our users feel the way we want them to feel. Like, for example, if we look at Facebook's memory feature or Google's rediscover the day feature, right? So both these are very great at tapping into the nostalgia feeling. That makes you feel an emotional experience or connect immediately when you see those memories in that format, right? Other emotions that you can tap into are like delight, desire, surprise, trust, boredom, love, and need for validation. Need for validation, I'm sure we've all use Instagram enough to to feel that need, right? So let's move on. So basically what I was trying to get at is that design is what makes hard easier for users, and what is easier should become memorable. This is again, this guy is my favorite person for quotes because he says very quotable things. But basically make any moments relatable in an experience, and then be sure to connect with the emotion of the users as well. Another thing to remember is think about how your users will anticipate the experience and how will they remember it later. Think about what do you want the user to feel after the end of thing, because we focus so much on conversion, or we want them to take an action, etc., but we don't think about, oh, what will this action actually leave me feeling, right? That's another sort of a way of looking at your design work as well. When you're critiquing yourself or someone else's work, you could probably consider what is the emotional journey that they're on. Which brings me to the last framework that I'm going to talk about. So the emotional journey is essentially, it was originally invented by this writer called Vonnegut, and what he said was all stories can be mapped as a line between misery and ecstasy, right? So happy to sad, and there's a line in between, and there's a beginning and end. So what happens in between is all those emotions. If you think about the movie Lion King, I hope you're old enough that you've seen Lion King, or actually any Disney movie for that matter. So thinking about Simba's journey, right? So everything begins very well for Simba. He gets into a bit of trouble with his dad, but then things get better. And of course his dad dies, and that's like the worst part of the movie. I think I was crying buckets of tears. And after that, things kind of get better because he runs away and then he finds friends in the jungle, but then things get bad again and he returns to his pride, and of course they save the day and everything ends well. So this is like the emotional journey map of Simba the lion.
Oh, that was a great session full of examples. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button for more such content. And if you like this video, I'm sure you're going to love this video from our channel. See you in the next one.